Have you ever struggled to make a new habit stick? I mean, really stick. Of course you have. We all have. But what if I told you the problem isn't a lack of willpower, but something else entirely? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive deep into the game-changing ideas from James Clear's Atomic Habits that will completely flip how you think about getting better. Just think about it for a second. Every January, millions of us set these huge, ambitious goals. We're going to exercise every day. We're going to eat super healthy. We're finally going to learn that new language. And then, what happens? By February, most of those goals have just vanished. It's a universal feeling. But why is it so incredibly hard to make a change last? Well, the answer is probably not what you think.
For as long as we can remember, we've been told that if we fail, it's a personal failing. It's a weakness, a lack of self-control. But James Clear argues that this is a total myth. The real reason your habits don't stick isn't because you're lazy, it's because you have a bad system. Your results are just a lagging measure of your habits, and your habits, they're just a product of the systems you've built.
So the big question is, how do we build better systems? That's what we're digging into today. We're going to explore 5 huge ideas from the book. First, we'll bust the willpower myth. Then we'll look at the incredible power of getting just 1% better. We'll talk about why your identity is more important than your goals, how to become the architect of your life, and finally, how to make those good habits actually enjoyable so they stick. All right, let's get into it.
Okay, first up, this idea that if we just tried a little harder, if we just had more discipline, all our problems would be solved. Our culture is absolutely obsessed with willpower. But the book introduces this really radical idea. What if the people we think are the most disciplined aren't actually using more willpower at all?
Let that one sink in for a second. This completely turns our idea of self-control upside down. What the research shows is that people with amazing self-discipline aren't superhuman. They're not fighting these epic internal battles all day. Nope. They are just smarter at designing their lives to avoid temptation in the first place. They don't have to resist the cookie jar if the cookie jar is never on the counter. The key isn't more willpower, it's a smarter environment.
And if a smarter environment is the goal, how do you even start to build one? Well, it's not with some massive dramatic change. And that brings us to the next huge idea from the book. Forget about massive changes. The real secret to long-term success is hidden in the power of tiny, tiny gains. 1%. It sounds like nothing, right? It's almost insignificant. But the effects of these tiny improvements over time are absolutely staggering. Why? Because of the power of compounding. Getting just 1% better every single day for a year means you'll end up, get this, 37 times better by the end. It's a slow burn at first, but it eventually leads to an explosion of growth.
Now, the most incredible real-world example of this is the story of British cycling. For almost 100 years, they were just okay, pretty mediocre actually. It got so bad that one of the top bike makers in Europe refused to sell bikes to the team because they were worried it would hurt their brand. Then they hired a guy named Dave Brailsford, who brought in a simple philosophy, the aggregation of marginal gains. Brailsford's whole approach was beautifully simple, yet so profound. Instead of looking for one single magical breakthrough, he and his team just focused on finding a tiny 1% improvement in every single area they could think of. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Yeah, some changes were obvious, like making the bike seats more comfortable, but they went so much further. They tested different massage gels. They rubbed alcohol on the tires for better grip. They literally hired a surgeon to teach the riders how to wash their hands properly so they wouldn't get sick. They even painted the inside of their team truck bright white just so they could spot tiny bits of dust that might mess with the bike mechanics. The result? Within 5 years, they completely dominated the sport. It's the perfect example. Tiny changes, absolutely remarkable results. Okay, so we know that tiny, consistent improvements are the key. But what keeps you going day after day? What's the fuel? This is where things get really interesting and we shift from focusing on what you're doing to who you're becoming. The most powerful habits, it turns out, are the ones tied to your identity. Look at this subtle but absolutely critical shift in thinking. The book tells this great story about a man who wanted to stop biting his nails. He didn't just focus on the goal. Instead, he started getting professional manicures. And that small act changed everything. For the first time, his nails looked nice, and he started to take pride in them. He started to see himself as the type of person who takes pride in caring for their nails. And once that identity took hold, the bad habit just melted away. And this, right here, is the real engine of lasting change. When your behavior and your identity are completely in sync, you're not trying to change anymore. You're just being you. You're just acting like the type of person you already believe you are.
And every little action you take becomes a vote for the person you want to become.
So how do you start casting those votes and reinforcing that new identity? You shape your environment to support it. Our surroundings have this huge, often invisible power over our actions, and this is where you get to take back control.
You might not even realize it, but the little cues all around you are constantly triggering your habits. That plate of cookies on the kitchen counter, your phone buzzing on the desk. But here's the great news. You don't have to be a victim of your surroundings. You can be the architect, and there is no more powerful, more shocking proof of this than a study of heroin addiction among soldiers in the Vietnam War.
Just look at these numbers. They are absolutely astounding. The conventional thinking on addiction is that it's this lifelong curse. For typical heroin users who go to rehab and then return to their old neighborhood, the relapse rate is about 90%. 90! But for the soldiers who were addicted in Vietnam, only 10% relapsed when they came back home. Think about that. 9 out of 10 of them eliminated their addiction almost overnight. How is that even possible?
It's simple, really. In Vietnam, the soldiers were surrounded by constant triggers for drug use, extreme stress, easy access, and a social group of other users. But when they flew home, they stepped into a completely different world, an environment that had none of those triggers. This study proved that even the most powerful, destructive habits can just dissolve when you radically change the context.
So, we've talked about identity and environment shaping our habits, but there's one last piece to this puzzle: your brain's reward system. Understanding how our brains are wired for immediate gratification is the final key to making good habits stick, for good.
Our brains evolved to care way more about right now than about someday. We prioritize immediate rewards over long-term ones, and that's exactly why bad habits are so easy to pick up. The reward is instant, the consequence is way down the road. So if you want to build a good habit, you have to find a way to hack this system and feel successful right away.
And there's a perfect, simple example of this called the paperclip strategy. There was this young stockbroker who started each day with 2 jars on his desk. One was filled with 120 paperclips, the other was empty. His goal was to make 120 sales calls a day, and every single time he made a call, he would just move one paperclip from the full jar over to the empty one.
So why was this so ridiculously effective? Because it created an immediate, tangible reward. Moving that single paperclip gave him a tiny little hit of satisfaction. It was a clear visual sign of progress. This super simple system closed the gap between his action, making a tough call, and its delayed reward, making a difficult habit feel satisfying right in the moment. And that made it repeatable.
And that really is what ties all of these ideas together. The problem was never the goal. The goal to make more sales, or lose weight, or learn a language, those are fine. The problem was the system. When you build a better system, one that makes your good habits obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, the results just start to take care of themselves.
The ideas in Atomic Habits are so powerful because they're not just theories, they're so incredibly practical. So I want to leave you with this question. What tiny 1% improvement could you make today, right now? What small habit could you start that casts a vote for the person you ultimately want to become? Because those tiny votes, compounded day after day, are what truly build a remarkable life.
If you like this video, consider subscribing to the channel and let me know in the comments what other content you'd like to see here. The link to purchase this book is below in the description. Thank you and see you next time.